Hand me that rifle. The voice, a rasp of arrogance and entitlement, cut through the dry desert air. It belonged to Lieutenant Commander Thorne, a man whose physique and gear screamed Tier 1 operator, a walking billboard for the Navy SEALs. He gestured impatiently, not at one of his own men, but at the woman quietly stacking ammo cans near the firing line. You, ammo girl, you're closer. Handed over, the crowd of elite soldiers, Green Berets, Rangers, Marine Raiders, all gathered for this joint forces exercise, fell into a tense, uncomfortable quiet. A few of Thorne's men snickered, the sound sharp and cruel. The woman, dressed in standard-issue fatigues with no discernible rank or unit patches, didn't flinch. Her movements remained economical, precise. She finished aligning a heavy can of 338 Lapua Magnum, the metal lid clicking shut with a sound of finality. She moved with a practiced grace that seemed at odds with her mundane task, her focus absolute, her posture a study in coiled potential. But when the general, observing from a shaded tower 200 yards away, saw the way she planted her feet, the subtle shift in her center of gravity as she turned, he leaned forward, a flicker of recognition in his old, wise eyes. He saw not a logistician, but a stance, a foundation. He saw a weapon system waiting for a trigger. The woman simply looked at Thorne, her expression unreadable, a placid lake in a hurricane of ego, and gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She was nothing to them but a background element, a cog in the great machine of their war games. They assumed her hands were only for counting, for lifting, for serving. They would soon learn, in a moment of shocking, deafening clarity, what those hands were truly made for. If you believe that true competence is measured in silence and action, not in volume and boasts, type proven in the comments below. For the story of this day would not be written in after-action reports, but etched into the very soul of every warrior who witnessed it, a permanent lesson on the mortal danger of assumption. This was the day they learned about Sergeant Anya Morgan, and the respect she did not ask for, but commanded with a single, perfectly placed round. The day began, as most do in this sun-scorched corner of the world, with a bite of a cool morning giving way to the oppressive hammer of the sun. The atmosphere at the advanced training range was thick with professional rivalry. Each unit brought its own brand of quiet pride, its own legends and swagger. Lieutenant Commander Thorne embodied the loudest of these. He strode the firing line like a colossus, his kit a symphony of cutting-edge technology, his voice a constant broadcast of his own perceived superiority. He saw the world in a simple hierarchy, SEALs at the top, everyone else somewhere below, and support personnel at the very bottom, barely worth acknowledging. The woman, Sergeant Morgan, was firmly in that last category in his eyes. He watched her for a moment, a smirk playing on his lips as she worked. She was of average height, with a wiry strength that was efficient rather than imposing. Her hair was pulled back in a severe, functional bun, and her face was a mask of professional neutrality, betraying nothing of the mind working behind her calm, steady eyes. She didn't hurry, but she was never idle. Every movement had a purpose. She lifted the heavy ammo cans not with a grunt of effort, but with a smooth application of leverage, her body a finely tuned machine. Thorne turned to his men, his voice loud enough for all to hear. See that? That's what discipline looks like in the rear echelon. Perfect little stacks. But she could win awards for stacking. The laughter was louder this time, a chorus of shared arrogance. Morgan gave no sign she had heard. She was focused on her task. Her world shrunk to the weight of the metal, the grit of the sand under her boots, the precise angle of each stacked container. This was her job, and she would do it perfectly. It was a discipline that ran deeper than Thorne could possibly comprehend. It was a silence born not of meekness, but of a profound, unshakable confidence that required no external validation. While he was broadcasting his strength to the world, she was conserving it, holding it in reserve like the latent energy in the brass cartridges she handled with such care. The onlookers, the men from other elite units, shifted uncomfortably. They recognized the casual cruelty, the institutional arrogance that could sometimes fester in the closed loops of special operations. They saw a woman being publicly diminished for doing her job, and while none dared to challenge a SEAL team leader, a seed of resentment was sown. They watched her, and they watched him, and the tension on the range became a palpable thing, a shimmering heat haze of unspoken conflict. Morgan finished her work. The ammunition was staged, the counts were verified, the area was clear. She stepped back, her hands resting calmly at her sides, and became an observer. Her stillness was in stark contrast to Thorne's restless energy. He was a predator, pacing and preening. She was a stone, patient and enduring, waiting for a purpose that only she could see coming. The stage was set, the characters were in place, and the great, humbling lesson was about to begin, carried on the desert wind and delivered with the force of a hypervelocity projectile. The exercise began with a crackle of radio traffic and the roar of a simulated breach. Thorne's team, call sign Trident, moved with the fluid, aggressive choreography of a unit at the peak of its powers. They flowed through the shoot house, a maze of concrete and steel designed to replicate a hostile compound. Targets fell with clinical precision, the rhythmic double taps of their carbines echoing across the range. The objective was complex: neutralize multiple threats and rescue a high-value hostage, represented by a specific reactive target on the far side of the compound. The final part of the scenario required a single, incredibly difficult sniper shot. The designated marksman for Trident, a seasoned chief petty officer named Ghost, was tasked with eliminating the terrorist leader holding the hostage. This target was placed at over 1,200 meters, partially obscured and surrounded by no-shoot silhouettes. It was a shot designed to test the absolute limits of skill, equipment, and nerve. From the observation tower, General Davies watched the monitors, his expression grim. He knew this scenario was a beast. The wind had picked up since the morning briefing, gusting unpredictably through the canyons that border the range, adding a layer of wicked complexity to an already near-impossible task. As Trident cleared the final room of the shoot house, they took up positions to support Ghost's shot. He was prone, settled behind his M210 enhanced sniper rifle, a masterpiece of ballistic engineering. His voice came over the net, calm and professional. "Spotter, give me wind." "I'm seeing a full-value gust from 9 o'clock." Before his spotter could answer, a puff of red smoke erupted near Ghost's position, the signal from the exercise controllers. A disembodied voice boomed over the range loudspeakers. "Trident marksman is Kia." "Repeat, Trident marksman is down." A collective groan went through the observers. The scenario was designed with redundancies, but Ghost was their ace. The backup shooter was good, but not that good, not for this shot in this wind. Thorne's voice, now stripped of its earlier swagger and laced with frustration, crackled over the radio. "Damn it. Backup. Get on the gun. We have 60 seconds to make the shot, or the hostage is gone." The backup sniper scrambled into position, but his movements were hurried, his breathing ragged. He fumbled with the scope adjustments, his confidence clearly shaken. He couldn't get a stable read on the wind, which was now whipping dust devils across the valley floor. "Sir, I can't. The mirage is too thick. The wind is all over the place. I can't guarantee the shot." The seconds ticked away. The mission and Thorne's pride were about to fail spectacularly in front of the entire special operations community. It was in this moment of rising panic and impending failure that Sergeant Morgan began to move. She didn't run. She moved with a deliberate, unhurried pace, a calm island in a sea of chaos. She walked directly towards the M210, still resting on its bipod where Ghost had left it. Thorne, seeing her approach from the corner of his eye, finally exploded. "What in the hell do you think you're doing? I told you to get away from that weapon. This isn't a game. Sergeant, get back to your ammo cans." His voice was a raw bellow of fury and humiliation, the last defense of a shattered ego. Morgan didn't even look at him. She reached the rifle, her movements fluid and certain. Her hands, which had so carefully stacked ammunition, now moved over the weapon with an intimacy that was breathtaking to behold. She didn't just pick it up, she connected with it. Her left hand settled the stock in her shoulder, her right found the pistol grip, her index finger resting alongside the trigger guard. It was a single, seamless motion, a reunion of artist and instrument. The rifle, a $10,000 piece of advanced weaponry, looked as if it had been forged as an extension of her own body. The desert wind whipped a strand of hair across her face, but she didn't notice. Her eyes, narrowed in absolute concentration, were already downrange, reading the subtle dance of the heat haze, feeling the pressure of the air on her skin, calculating, processing, becoming the moment. The entire range had fallen silent, the drama of the failing mission replaced by a new, powerful mystery. Who was this woman? Where did this impossible calm come from? In her silence, in her complete disregard for Thorne's rage, she projected an aura of competence so profound, so absolute, that it defied all logic and expectation. She was no longer an ammo hauler. She was a professional, and she was about to go to work. The air grew thick with a silence that was louder than Thorne's shouting had ever been. Every eye, from the operators on the ground to the brass in the tower, was locked on the unassuming figure now settled behind the M210. Morgan's movements were a masterclass in the economy of motion, a physical manifestation of pure, distilled competence. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation. She gently eased the rifle forward, seating the bipod firmly in the dust. Her left hand slid under the buttstock, forming a stable rear bag against her shoulder. Her cheek found the stock, creating a perfect, repeatable weld. It was a position of such textbook flawlessness that it looked like a diagram from a marksmanship manual brought to life. She didn't need a spotter. Her eyes scanned the terrain between her and the target, not just looking but reading. She watched the way the tall grass swayed near the firing line, how the dust kicked up from a ridge 1,000 meters out, how the heat shimmered and danced over a small ravine just before the target berm. To the others, it was a chaotic mess of wind and mirage. To her, it was a language, a complex equation of atmosphere variables that her mind was solving in real time. She reached up with her right hand, her fingers finding the turret on the top of the high-powered scope. The clicks were sharp, audible in the profound quiet. 1, 2, 3. Each adjustment was precise, decisive. She wasn't guessing. She was inputting a solution. She was dialing in the answer to a problem that had stumped a trained SEAL sniper. Thorne, standing a few feet away, was rendered mute by the sheer authority of her actions. The insults died on his lips, replaced by a dawning, horrified suspicion that he had made a terrible, career-defining mistake. He could see the focused calm in her eyes, the steady, rhythmic rise and fall of her chest as she controlled her breathing. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't some logistician playing with a tool she didn't understand. This was the cold, practiced ritual of a master at her craft. Inside the observation tower, General Davies leaned into his microphone, his voice a low command to the range controller. Hold all traffic. Give her the range. The controller, mesmerized by the scene unfolding on his monitors, simply nodded. The seconds continued their inexorable march toward mission failure. Less than 20 remained. Morgan took a final, slow breath, letting half of it out, finding the natural respiratory pause where the human body is most still. The world seemed to shrink. The noise of the onlookers, the pressure of the moment, the weight of 100 skeptical eyes, it all faded away, leaving only her, the rifle, and the distant target. The crosshairs of the scope settled, hovering with unnatural stillness over the small, designated impact zone. She made a final, minute adjustment for the wind she alone could read, holding the reticle slightly to the left and high. Then, her finger moved, and with a pressure so smooth it was almost imperceptible, she broke the shot. The crack of the rifle was like a thunderclap in the silence, a violent, definitive sound that ripped through the tension. It was followed by a half-second of agonizing suspense as the bullet traveled its long, invisible arc across the valley. And then, ping. The sound was small, almost insignificant, but it carried across the range with the weight of an atomic blast. It was the clear, high-pitched ring of a copper-jacketed lead projectile striking hardened steel. On the main monitor in the observation tower, the feed from the target camera zoomed in. There, in the dead center of the hostage-taker's silhouette, a fresh, gleaming silver crater had appeared. It wasn't just a hit. It was a perfect, clinical, impossible shot. For a long moment, Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The collective disbelief was a physical force pressing down on the range. The backup sniper stared, his mouth agape. Thorne's men looked from the monitor to Morgan and back again, their faces a mixture of awe and confusion. Thorne himself looked like he had been struck by lightning. His arrogant smirk was gone, replaced by a pale mask of pure shock. He managed to stammer a single whispered phrase that was picked up by his open mic and broadcast to everyone on the net. "No, that's not possible. No way." The silence that followed was different. It was no longer the silence of tension, but the deafening silence of revelation. In that one perfect shot, Sergeant Anya Morgan had not just saved the exercise. She had shattered a world of prejudice, rewritten the rules of respect, and turned a training range into a place of legend. The spell of stunned silence was finally broken by the crunch of gravel under heavy boots. General Davies descended from the observation tower, moving with a purpose that commanded attention. The operators parted before him like the Red Sea, their eyes darting from the three-star general to the quiet woman who was now methodically clearing the M210 rifle, her movements just as precise and unhurried as they had been before the shot. The general didn't even glance at the dumbstruck Lieutenant Commander Thorne. His focus was entirely on Sergeant Morgan. He stopped a few feet from her, his gaze taking in the scene. The impossibly perfect hit on the distant target, the state-of-the-art rifle she was handling with such reverent familiarity, and the unshakable calm that radiated from her like an invisible shield. Her actions had spoken volumes, but now his words would provide the history, the context that would cement this moment into legend. "Sergeant Morgan," he said, his voice quiet but carrying the unmistakable weight of command. It was the first time anyone had addressed her by rank all day. She looked up, her expression still neutral, and simply replied, "General." It was not a question, but an acknowledgement. He turned to his aide, a young captain who was scrambling to keep up. "Captain, pull up Sergeant First Class Anya Morgan's service record. Put on the main display for everyone to see." Full clearance. The aide fumbled with his datapad for a moment, his fingers trembling slightly. On the large monitors around the range, the target feed vanished, replaced by the stark, black and white text of an official military personnel file. A collective gasp rippled through the assembled soldiers as the first lines appeared. The narrator's voice, now filled with a tone of reverent authority, seemed to fill the air as the credentials scrolled down the screen, each line a hammer blow to the foundation of their assumptions. Name, Morgan Anya. Rank, Sergeant First Class. Unit, United States Army Marksmanship Unit, AMU, Senior Instructor, Advanced Ballistics Division. The screen refreshed, displaying a list of previous assignments, a litany of the most elite and secretive units in the U.S. military. Most of the unit names were simply blacked out, replaced by the stark, intimidating text. Classified, Tier 1. Qualifications, Master Sniper, Honor Graduate, High-Angle Marksmanship Instructor, Special Operations Target Interdiction Course, SOTIC, Cadre, Ballistics, Engineering, and Atmospheric Science Subspecialist. The list went on, a breathtaking curriculum vitae of lethal expertise. Then came the awards. Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star with Oak Leaf Cluster, Bronze Star with V4 Valor, X3, Purple Heart, X2. The screen was a constellation of the nation's highest honors for bravery and skill, each one representing a story of quiet heroism in a place the world would never know about. Finally, a single line of text appeared at the bottom, a note added from a classified annex, declassified for this moment by the general's command. Record. Holds current operational record for longest confirmed hostile sniper engagement. Classified theater of operations. Distance. Classified. The word classified seemed more powerful than any number could ever be. The mystery of Sergeant Morgan was solved, replaced by an even more profound sense of awe. This wasn't just a good shooter. This was a living legend, a ghost of the modern battlefield, hiding in plain sight as an ammo specialist. General Davies let the information sink in, allowing the full weight of Thorne's ignorance to crush him. He then turned back to Morgan. In a gesture that stunned every soldier present, The three-star general removed his patrol cap, holding it in his hand. It was a sign of deference, of profound, personal respect that transcended rank. "Sergeant," he began, his voice softer now, filled with a personal warmth. "I haven't seen shooting like that since your father, Master Sergeant Rick Deadeye Morgan, taught me how to read wind at Fort Benning 30 years ago. He was the best I ever saw. Until today." He paused, his eyes locking with hers, a silent communication passing between them, a shared understanding of legacy, of a sacred skill passed from one generation to the next. Then, his gaze hardened as he turned to face the mortified Lieutenant Commander Thorne. The general's voice dropped, becoming cold steel. "Lieutenant Commander, the woman you publicly ridiculed, the ammo girl you dismissed, is not only a decorated combat veteran, she is the individual who literally wrote the advanced sniper doctrine your entire team is trained on. The wind-reading formulas your down marksman was trying to use? She developed them. That rifle." He gestured to the M210. "She was on the design and testing committee. She knows more about what that weapon can do than the engineers who built it." He took a step closer to Thorne, his voice a low, dangerous whisper that was nevertheless broadcast to the entire range. "You will render a formal, public apology to Sergeant First Class Morgan. You will thank her for saving your team from abject failure. And then you will report to my office, where we will have a very long discussion about leadership, humility, and the profound stupidity of making assumptions. Is that understood?" Thorne, his face ashen, could only manage a choked, barely audible reply. "Yes, General. Crystal clear." The apology was as swift as it was complete. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, stripped of his arrogance, stood at attention before Sergeant Morgan. His voice, once a bullhorn of condescension, was now quiet and strained with the weight of his humiliation. "Sergeant First Class Morgan," he began, his words formal and precise. "My conduct was unprofessional, disrespectful, and ignorant. There is no excuse for my words or my attitude. You demonstrated a level of skill and professionalism that I failed to recognize. I apologize. Thank you for your intervention. It was an honor to witness." Morgan met his gaze, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than neutrality crossed her face. It wasn't triumph, nor was it pity. It was a simple, professional acknowledgement. She gave him a sharp, formal nod. "Apology accepted, Lieutenant Commander," and with that, the matter was closed for her. She had no interest in his shame. She had a job to do. But for everyone else on that range, the event was just beginning. The story, as stories of such profound vindication do, spread not like wildfire, but like a detonation. Before the dust had even settled, the whispers began. The Rangers spoke of the ghost from the AMU. The Green Berets talked about the impossible shot, dissecting the wind conditions, trying to reverse engineer her genius. The Marine Raiders, men who prided themselves on their own marksmanship prowess, simply shook their heads in silent, reverent awe. By the time evening chow call came around, the legend was already taking shape. It was no longer just a story about a great shot. It had become a parable. It was the story of the Morgan shot, or, as some of the younger soldiers began calling the far end of the range, Morgan's line. It became a cautionary tale whispered to new arrivals at the base, a lesson in humility passed from one generation of warriors to the next. The name Morgan became a byword for quiet competence, a symbol of the lethal professional who wears no badge of their own greatness. The ripple effects continued to spread. The next morning, a deeply humbled Thorne approached Morgan as she was overseeing the cleaning of the unit's rifles. He didn't come with excuses or platitudes. He came with a request. "Sergeant," he said, his tone respectful, "I've reviewed my team's performance data. We have weaknesses in high-angle, high-wind scenarios. We rely too much on our tech and not enough on fundamentals. I was wondering, I would be honored if you would consider running my men through a block of your instruction." Morgan looked up from the rifle she was inspecting, wiping a spot of carbon from the bolt with a clean cloth. She saw not the arrogant officer from the day before, but a leader who had learned a hard lesson and was trying to better his men. "Understood, sir," she replied, her voice even. "Be on the line tomorrow. 0500. We'll start with the basics." Breathing. Her acceptance was simple, direct, and devoid of any gloating. Her purpose was not to punish, but to teach. Her expertise was a resource, and she would share it with anyone who was serious about learning. That week, she ran the SEALs ragged. She broke them down to the absolute fundamentals of marksmanship, stripping away their reliance on advanced computers and forcing them to read the wind, feel the humidity, and understand the soul of their weapon. She was a demanding instructor, her standards absolute, her praise rare, and her corrections sharp. Yet, she did it all with a quiet authority that earned their unwavering respect. They saw that her silence was not an absence of knowledge, but a deep well of it. They learned that her competence was not a singular event, but a constant state of being. A few days later, a small, unofficial ceremony took place in the range tower. The single spent 338 Lapua casing from her shot, polished to a high gleam, had been mounted on a small wooden plaque. Beneath it, a brass plate was engraved with the date, the weapon system, the distance, and a single, powerful phrase. Assume nothing, the plaque was hung on the wall, a permanent testament to the day. An ammo hauler reminded an entire community of elite warriors that the most dangerous person in the room is often the one you see, but do not notice. The legend of Sergeant Morgan's shot became more than just a story. It became part of the institution's DNA. It was integrated into the introductory briefings for all new personnel, regardless of rank or specialty. A grainy photo taken from the observation tower, showing a lone, unassuming figure settled perfectly behind a massive sniper rifle, was pinned to the central bulletin board in the main operations building. The lesson was clear and unequivocal. Respect is earned through competence, and competence can be found in the most unexpected of places. The culture of the base began to subtly shift. The loud, boastful displays of prowess that had once been common began to fade, replaced by a more sober, professional atmosphere. The younger soldiers started to emulate Morgan's quiet demeanor, focusing more on their skills and less on their image. They learned that true confidence doesn't need to announce itself. It is self-evident in the quality of one's work. Lieutenant Commander Thorne became the most prominent example of this transformation. The humbling he endured on the range broke his arrogance, but forged him into a far better leader. He became known for his meticulous attention to detail and for the deep respect he showed every member of his team, from his lead breacher to the support personnel who packed their parachutes. He actively sought out expertise, no matter the rank of the person who possessed it. He had learned, in the most public way imaginable, that every person in the chain has a critical role and may possess a skill that could one day save his life. His teams became more cohesive, more efficient, and more lethal, not in spite of his humiliation, but because of it. He would often bring his new operators to the range tower and point to the plaque with the spent casing. "Look at that," he would tell them. "That is the most important lesson you will ever learn." That round was fired by a sergeant who I, in my ignorance, dismissed. She was a master of her craft, hiding in plain sight. Never, ever assume you know who you're dealing with. Judge a person on one thing and one thing only. Their professionalism. Morgan, for her part, remained unchanged by the sudden fame. She deflected the praise and resisted any attempt to Leoneize her. When a young ranger, wide-eyed with hero worship, asked her how it felt to make that shot, she simply replied, "The process was correct. The result was therefore expected for her." The impossible shot was not a moment of magic, but the logical conclusion of thousands of hours of training, study, and discipline. It was the physical manifestation of a lifetime of dedication. She continued her work, instructing, mentoring, and quietly raising the standards of every soldier she came into contact with. Her greatest legacy was not the single round she fired, but the hundreds of elite marksmen she trained in its aftermath. She taught them that a rifle is more than a tool. It is a complex instrument that must be understood on an intuitive level. She taught them that marksmanship is not just about mechanics, but about a state of mind, a place of absolute calm and focus where the chaos of the battlefield cannot penetrate. She taught them that the silence before the shot is as important as the shot itself. The symbolic artifact of the plaque became a pilgrimage site. Operators from visiting units would make a point to go see it, to touch the wood, and to reflect on its meaning. It served as a constant, physical reminder that institutional arrogance is a vulnerability, and that humility is a force multiplier. The story of Morgan's Line became a foundational myth for a new generation, a modern military fable with a timeless moral. It was a testament to the idea that true worth is not found in the insignia on a collar or the patches on a sleeve, but in the steady hands and the quiet, unwavering competence of the professional who has mastered their craft. A year passed. The scorching sun still beat down on the desert range, but the atmosphere had been irrevocably altered. The change was palpable in the quiet professionalism of the soldiers, in the respectful interactions between different units, and in the very doctrine that governed their training. The story of Sergeant Morgan was no longer just a piece of gossip. It was now case study one in the human factors and special operations course taught at the facility. Newcomers didn't just hear the story, they analyzed it. They studied the cognitive biases that led to Thorne's error, confirmation bias, stereotyping, and the halo effect of his own unit's prestige. They learned that the most dangerous threat is often the one you underestimate, the one your own prejudice renders invisible. The legend had become curriculum. The myth had become doctrine. General Davies made sure of it. He saw the event not as an embarrassing incident, but as a priceless, teachable moment. He believed that an organization that cannot learn from its mistakes is doomed to repeat them on the battlefield, where the cost is measured in lives, not just in pride. He often used the story in his speeches to young officers, a powerful illustration of the true meaning of leadership. Your job as a leader, he would say, is not to be the most skilled person in the room. Your job is to recognize skill, to cultivate it, and to empower the person who has it, regardless of their rank, their gender, or the job title on the paperwork. The day you think you know everything is the day you become a liability to your people. Lieutenant Commander Thorne, now a commander, was leading his team on a high-stakes deployment in a war-torn country. During a critical operation, their primary communications specialist was injured. Panic began to set in as they were cut off from their support. Thorne, remembering the lesson of Morgan's Line, remained calm. He looked at his team, not at their roles, but at their records. He remembered that a young logistician attached to his unit, a quiet corporal everyone else ignored, had listed advanced network engineering as a civilian skill. He brought the corporal forward, gave him the equipment, and empowered him to work. The corporal, a genius with satellite uplinks, had them back online in minutes, saving the mission from catastrophic failure. In his after-action report, Thorne wrote a single line. Credit for mission success goes to Corporal Evans, who reminded me of a lesson I learned a year ago. Assume nothing. Sergeant First Class Anya Morgan was eventually reassigned from the AMU to a position where her unique skills could be put to even greater use. Her new role was classified, her location unknown. She disappeared back into the shadows from which she had briefly emerged, leaving behind nothing but a legend and a generation of shooters trained in her philosophy. But her legacy remained. The young soldiers she mentored became the new instructors, teaching marksmanship not just as a physical act, but as a mental and spiritual discipline. They taught the importance of a clear mind, a steady hand, and a humble heart. They taught the Morgan method, a holistic approach that blended ballistic science with a Zen-like focus. The range itself, Morgan's Line, became a symbol of this new ethos. It was a place where ego was left at the gate, and only skill mattered. It was a place where a quiet logistician could be more respected than a decorated operator, if their competence was proven. The story endured because it resonated with a fundamental truth of the warrior ethos. That actions will always speak louder than words, that precision is more valuable than posturing, and that the ultimate measure of a professional is not the story they tell about themselves, but the results they deliver when the moment of consequence arrives. It became a timeless lesson, echoing in the barracks and briefing rooms. The greatest strength is often wrapped in the greatest silence. True legacy isn't what you leave behind a hail of noise and glory. It is what continues forward in the quiet, perfect execution of a difficult task, a standard of excellence that inspires others to be better. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud assumption, and where silent precision defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Tales.